Hi, Deborah.
Good morning.
Hi, it's Cynthia.
Nice to meet you, Cynthia.
Oh, nice to, yeah, we are happy to have you. Hi, Ephraim. Hi, Sankire.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to leave the meeting. I've made Ephraim the host. Take care. Sorry, I can't join.
Sorry.
Hi.
Thank
Hi, Deb.
Hi. Hi, Sankire.
Hi, Deborah.
Good morning.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
Good morning,
Yes, we
Ephraim.
can hear you. Hello, Sankire. Hello, Sankire. Deborah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, I'm trying to communicate with Sankire to find out whether he's sharing or I should go ahead, but he's not. Hello, hello, Sankire. Can you hear me? Sankire, can you hear me? Unmute yourself, maybe. Can others hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello.
Thank you. Hello, Sankire, can you hear me now? I'm just wondering whether we should start. Can I go ahead, Sankire?
Sure.
Yes, can you hear me?
Okay.
Can I go ahead?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
All right. Okay, I see there are about 24 participants right now. Let me say good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all. I'm Cynthia Chaiva. I'm a nurse midwife from Zimbabwe. I work for the National University of Science and Technology, and I teach nursing and midwifery programs there. I'm also an executive board member of AfroPHC. Before we go to anything, I would like us to introduce ourselves so that we know each other before I present today's presenter for our research topic. Thank you. I'll just ask anyone who is available to introduce yourself and put on the camera so that we can see your face. Thank you. Elizabeth. Okay. Hello, anyone, please. Yes.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
Okay, I am Paul Bangura Civil Society Movement Against Tuberculosis, Freetown, Sierra Leone.
Thank you. Welcome.
Amen.
Next person.
Hi, good morning. This is Amal Abulgasim. I'm public health specialist from Sudan.
Thank you. Welcome. Another person. If you are not able, just write on the chat, and we'll read it. Most people will read it. Thank you, Maeve. May I have some word?
Hello, everyone. I'm Grace Danda from NASTE lecturer, and I work with Dr. Cynthia Chaiva. Nice to meet you all. Thank you.
Welcome, Grace.
Hello. Good evening, everyone. This is Dr. Ritanjali Sahu from India. And thank you all over here, and I welcome you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. I notice we are so many, maybe we only have 2 hours for this session. So if we can introduce ourselves briefly so that we know each other.
Hello.
If you are unable. Hello.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tijani Oseni, a family physician from Nigeria.
Welcome. Welcome to the meeting.
Hello. Hello.
Yes. Hello.
I'm Mr. Takunju Biko of Cameroon. I'm a senior nurse and specialize in epidemiology.
Thank you very much. Welcome.
Hello, I'm Dr. Amadou Koita from Mali. I'm a health economist. Hello, do you hear
Thank
me?
you. Yes, we can
Okay.
hear you. Thank you
Okay,
very
thank
much.
you.
You're welcome.
I'm from Mali. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Cynthia, please, for time's sake, can they introduce themselves in the chat so that the presenter can go ahead? So you introduce the presenter.
All right. Okay. Yes. As I said, you know, the time is not on our side. Those that have not introduced themselves, may I, you know, just ask you to write your name on the chat and introduce yourself. Let me take this opportunity to introduce the speaker for today, who is none other than Dr. Deborah Lindell. She's a nurse. She is the Marvin E. and Ruth Denekas Professor, Francis Payne Bolton School of Nursing, Case Western Reserve University.
Good.
Okay, please switch off your micros. She has over 50 years experience in nursing. Hello, please.
Dr. Chaiva, I think you are muted. Can you unmute yourself?
Okay, I'm sorry.
Again, Doctor, you are muted. Please mute yourself.
Anyway, Dr. Lindell, she has over 50 years experience in nursing, with over 30 years in nursing education and 15 years in nursing program administration. Since 2000, Dr. Lindell has taught courses, supervised student research, and conducted projects in Mexico, Vietnam, China, and Kenya. During 2021 to 2022, Dr. Lindell was a Fulbright US faculty scholar in Lodwar in Kenya. Dr. Lindell teaches nursing theory, nursing education, community public health, and qualitative methods, and supervises Doctor of Nursing practice students projects. For 2022 to 2023, she is her School of Nursing Coordinator of Curriculum Transformation and preceptor in the School of medicine. Dr. Lindell's scholarship focuses on the area in nursing education, and she has expertise in preference to qualitative methods. This is why she's here today. Dr. Lindell, over to you, and may you share with us your topic on getting the grips with qualitative research. Welcome, Dr.
Good morning, everyone. Good evening. Good afternoon, whatever it is where you are. I am very delighted to be invited to share with you an introduction to qualitative inquiry. It is the approach to research that I enjoy the most, and I hope that I can tell you about it and why I feel it's an important aspect of research and how it can benefit your research activities. So I did ask that if you have a moment, to put in the chat whether you have experience or training in qualitative research in the past. And the first thing that I do when I start any meeting or class is to take a couple of minutes for mindfulness, because we are all very busy, and taking a couple of minutes to relax a little bit and bring ourselves into the moment gives us a chance to be more attentive and engaged. So I invite you to take a minute or so to just sit quietly and take some slow, deep breaths, and just focus on your breathing for a couple of minutes, and I'll be right back. Okay, so welcome back. And we know that in healthcare, at least in the US, where we have been paying a lot of attention to promoting the safety of healthcare as well as the quality, we know that a lot of safety issues and healthcare adverse events have to do with premature closure, ineffective communication among different members of the team, and different system issues. And one of the big factors in all of that is the distraction that healthcare providers experience, or the challenges that they have in being present and being in the moment and being focused on the situation at hand. And so we are doing more and more in health education, in nursing and medicine and other professions on helping our learners to be mindful, to be focused, and to be present in the moment. So this is just one example of an activity that we do. Okay, so just to give you an idea of where I am today, I live in Ohio in the US, and specifically I live in the very northern east part of Ohio. This is Canada over here. This is one of the Great Lakes, Great Erie. We call Ohio the north coast of the United States because we are right here on the border with Canada, with the lake in between. And the university that I teach at is actually only about 10 minutes by car from Lake Erie. I live a little further south, about 40 minutes south of the lake, but my university is actually very close to Lake Erie. My connection with AfroPHC is that in September 21 through just this past May, I was a Fulbright U.S. faculty scholar in Turkana County in Kenya. My host was Turkana University College, a small new college in a very remote area of Northwest Kenya. I lived at Turkana Basin Institute, which is Turkana University College is in Lodwar. It's actually this red spot here on the map in Turkana County. And I lived at Turkana Basin Institute, which was actually about an hour away by car from Lodwar towards Lake Turkana. And Turkana Basin Institute is actually an anthropology paleontology research facility. And I had become connected with them when visitors from Turkana University College and Turkana Basin Institute came to my university looking to establish collaborative activities. So my host for my project was Turkana University College, but I lived at TBI. And then I also partnered with the Turkana County Ministry of Health and Sanitation. My project, you can see the title of it here, was essentially, was working with Turkana University College to help them to begin the process of planning a undergraduate nursing program. These are my the outcomes that I hope that you all will achieve between this session and the one on November 1st. So we're going to look at what qualitative inquiry is, differentiate it from quantitative, look at the elements of a qualitative proposal, whether you are applying for funding or a student or whatever the purpose is. Look at some types of qualitative inquiry, the steps in gathering and analyzing data, promoting rigor of qualitative findings, critiquing a research report, and then thinking about how you might incorporate qualitative inquiry in your research. So please take a moment to read this content from a qualitative study. What is your reaction? A couple of people, we can't talk to everyone right now, but unmute your mic if you have some thoughts on how do you react when you read this? Or put something in the chat. What is your reaction? Anybody want to share? How do you feel when you read this? Most people find that they, yes, I see somebody feel sad, yes. The child's not getting attention, yes. Anybody want to take write a note as to what you think this problem is that's being described here? Yes, guilt feelings. Yes, so as you can probably imagine or identify, this is these are quotes of women experiencing postpartum depression. And this was some of the very initial research done on postpartum depression to really articulate, to explore what it felt like for the women who were experiencing it. And it was done by Dr. Cheryl Beck, who is a nurse and a midwife, a professor at the University of Connecticut. And over time, these studies that were done in the mid-1990s led to screening tools to screen for postpartum depression, because through her research, she identified signs and symptoms as well as risk factors. And eventually, at least in the West, in the US, screening for postpartum depression is now a best practice and expectation during pregnancy, looking for depression, but looking for risk factors. There's the Edinburgh Postnatal Depression Scale, and it's also done, we now have pediatricians, pediatric practice where, and family practice where when they're examining the newborn, the infant, they will do screening for postpartum depression, because oftentimes the mother is now done getting routine visits for a good while, but they're bringing the child for care, so they screen at that point too. So qualitative research. These quotes are an example of qualitative research. And the first thing we're going to look at is then, what is it? There's many definitions for qualitative research. Basically, it is the study of things in their natural settings. And the aim is to understand or interpret these, whatever phenomena you're interested in studying, in terms of the meaning, what it means to people. Sometimes the word essence is used, or the word emergence, allowing the meanings to emerge from the data that's collected, the information about that phenomenon. So these are just some of the different characteristics of qualitative research. In qualitative research, there is no one absolute truth, which distinguishes it from quantitative. Context is important, the setting. We're looking for meanings. The researcher is the instrument. There's a relationship between the participant and the researcher, whereas in quantitative, the researcher tries very hard not to have a relationship. You have to have skills in doing qualitative research. You can flex your design as you go along. We'll look at that. The types of issues and questions are unique with qualitative. There's different opportunities for using different softwares, and now doing interviews using Zoom and things like that. So these are some of the characteristics of qualitative research. Whoops. Okay, so again, just differentiating. Qualitative is interested in words. Generally, it's inductive reasoning, not always, but most of the time. It is not intended to be generalizable. It is context specific, but there are things you can do to help the reader apply or see if it applies to their situation. Whereas quantitative research is numbers, deductive reasoning, and generalizable. In order to think about whether qualitative research is a fit for you, it's helpful to take a quick look at the philosophies of science. Traditionally, starting back in the 1700s, the 1800s, when we had microscopes and other devices to measure things, mathematics was developing. The approach to the study of society and to the building of science and knowledge was to look for specific truth, to measure everything, to do experiments, to use statistics, and this over time was then referred to positivism. And it is important then over time to recognize, and this is just a very quick overview to get us to where qualitative research is that we learned over time that there are different ways in science of looking at reality, that not everyone, not every situation, not every phenomenon is best studied through numbers and by trying to look for one absolute truth. And so over time, we began to see that we can think about what is reality, how can I understand it, and what means can I use to understand it? What data can I collect? And so over time, there have evolved many philosophies of science, not just positivism or empiricism, which is the use of measurement and the researcher as separate from the situation and random samples and all of that, that now there are many other philosophies. And as time has gone by, we have seen that quantitative methods turned out to not necessarily be the optimal way for those that had these other philosophies of science, and that led to the development of qualitative inquiry as a way to help gather information and to understand people's perspectives using these other philosophies. So this just compares, again, using the philosophies of science, qualitative and quantitative research. Qualitative, interested in people's meanings and realizing that different people have different meanings to attach different meanings to the same situation. Whereas in quantitative, we're looking for facts, things that can be measured, analyzing with statistical analyses. Whereas in qualitative, the researcher is the data collection instrument, and we report our results in language, in writing. So this just shows how qualitative inquiry emerged as a way to build understanding and knowledge as these different philosophies of science emerged. So should you use qualitative inquiry or not? Oops. It can come from, you may decide you want to use qualitative methods because it fits with how you view reality and science. You may fit into one of these philosophies over here that are generally linked to qualitative inquiry. So this may, if you view reality and science in these ways, then you're probably going to want to use qualitative inquiry. And that was what happened to me. When I first studied qualitative inquiry, I realized that it was a good fit for how I viewed my worldview, how I viewed life and science. And so then I shaped my study to fit with that. However, another way is to start with your problem or your purpose and your questions, and then ask yourself, what is the best approach to answer these, to achieve my aims? Is it quantitative or is it qualitative? So you can start with your views of reality, which can then lead to your purpose and questions and to qualitative inquiry. That's the approaches I've taken. Or you can fit anywhere in this cycle. And we'll see there are different types of qualitative inquiry. So the overall steps, which is what I'm going to try and cover in these today's session and in the next one, are everybody starts with some kind of an introduction, some background, and then your problem, purpose, and questions. Then at this point, you should have an idea, even though this is all iterative, as you know, and you're still going back, even when you get to methodology, you're going back and tweaking your introduction. But still, at this point, you should probably have a good idea. Or am I going to use qualitative or quantitative inquiry? We'll look at the relevance of a theoretical framework. Everybody defines their key concepts and talks about significance. Literature review can be very different in qualitative. You still do one, but it may be later after you collect your data. We'll look at that. Bracketing is something that's used in qualitative. And then in the methodology, if you haven't decided what type of qualitative inquiry you're going to use, when you get to design, you would be thinking about that. And then some parts, obviously, you have to have a setting, a population, you think about your sample, but the way you do it is different in qualitative. So we'll get to that. In qualitative, your analysis is concurrent with your data collection. You start your analysis with the very first bit of data that you collect. If you're doing an interview, you start right then. And then there are strategies to promote rigor of your results. Qualitative research classically does not have validity and reliability, but there are things you can do to help ensure that your results are rigorous. And then you report and then have your discussion. So when do you use qualitative inquiry? Well, as I said, it can be because you relate to it, you like it. It's the type of inquiry you feel most comfortable with. Then you shape your study to fit that. If you are open to qualitative or quantitative, and there can be overlap, there's some situations where you could go either way. Think about what is currently known. If there is little known, or there isn't a model or a theory to explain the phenomenon, or if there's no instrument to measure the phenomenon, then qualitative may be an appropriate approach. This fits in with the problem as well. What is your purpose? If you want to conceptualize, if you are have a concept that you want to understand more, or theory development, qualitative research can be useful. If you want to gain a deep understanding of the meaning of a situation to people involved in it, sensitizing can be a good use of qualitative methods. If you want to learn the factors involved in a situation, what's influencing a situation because there's no theory to explain it, possibly the first step in instrument development, qualitative methods can be useful. And then to illustrate a situation, to describe it, to become immersed in it, to look for the essences, are all reasons that you might use qualitative methods. what are your research questions? If your verbs have words like to describe, to explore, to understand, to examine, the words lived experience, what is it like to live with? Those are often words that then are a good fit with qualitative inquiry. And as I said, there are times that these words like describe could go either way, but if there's no instrument to measure the phenomenon, then qualitative might be a good fit. And certain types of research questions, as we'll see later on, can set you up for a particular type of qualitative inquiry. So for example, we'll look at phenomenology later on, but typically if you have a purpose or a question that talks about lived experience, that can set you up then for using phenomenology. And then for the researcher, for yourself, how do I view reality and science? One truth or multiple truths? Words, numbers, both? Do I like to talk with people? Do I like to listen, to read, to write? Do I value people's perspectives and stories? How much time do I have? Qualitative research can take longer, especially on the analysis side. Am I okay with messy data where it's maybe difficult to make sense of it? I have to spend a lot of time with it, called dwelling with the data. Are you okay with that? Is there already a theory to explain the phenomenon or an instrument to measure it? If so, maybe quantitative's a better fit. And what is your knowledge and experience with qualitative inquiry? Have you done interviews? Have you led focus groups? Do you know the methods? Do you have a mentor? In the information I gave with resources, I included a massive online course by Coursera that I require my students to take if they're not taking our own qualitative course. And it is very well done and covers all aspects of qualitative research, or an introduction to it. How do you view data? This is an example showing that after multiple regression in quantitative research, we come up with a line that represents the overall average or mean or the trend of all the participants. Whereas in qualitative, we're interested in each of these different data points, including the ones way out here. And why is this one different? What perspective do they have so that we should be thinking about? So think about how you view data. I love this cartoon. The way I feel is hard to quantify. And she says, how do you feel on a scale of 1 to 10? And I know for myself, I do not like doing quantitative surveys. I'm always looking for a text box to tell me, to give me an opportunity to write a note, because I don't like being forced into categories that someone else already chose. So here's an example of a study that I did with 2 physicians, Grace Heng and one physician, Grace Heng. Lynn Jaffe is a physical therapist, faculty member at a school of physical therapy and occupational therapy, And then Amy Sullivan is a PhD in education. She works in medical education in Boston. So we wound up through a various sequence of events of forming a team to look at how healthcare faculty teach critical thinking. And we wound up with, we did a qualitative study because there was very little known. There was conjecture, there were descriptive, what people thought were strategies, but no, we could not find research where they had actually studied in a rigorous way how people teach critical thinking. So that was the problem. And so we did a study in which then the purpose of this multi-site qualitative study was to characterize the instructional strategies of faculty members actually teaching critical thinking. So we were describing, we were asking them how they teach it. And our questions, what approaches do they use? And how explicit is the teaching? Have they written about it? Have they published it? Have they done presentations? So we were interested in that as well, since we couldn't find anything much in the literature. This is another example. This is the article that we're going to critique in the next session in November. Care seeking during fatal childhood illness in rural South Africa, qualitative study. So they have their background. They note that there has been no previous qualitative studies on this particular topic. So their aim was to understand, I've put in red the words that then set up for qualitative design or qualitative inquiry, to understand, to look at their experiences, their decision-making, barriers. So here they're identifying factors. So the background and the aim are written in a way to that building the line of reasoning towards what type of inquiry you're going to use. This sets the stage for qualitative inquiry. The remainder of your introduction, theoretical model or framework, oftentimes in traditionally qualitative inquiry, there is no theoretical model framework because one doesn't exist. In fact, that can be the aim of your qualitative study, is to come up with a substantive framework, a beginning theory or model. The reality is that some studies you will see a theoretical basis. My experience is that if I'm going to use something in that arena, I call it underpinnings. So we're not testing a theory. We're not using deductive reasoning to come up with our methods, but it is helping us have a perspective. And we have to be very careful if we have a theory or a model that relates to our topic that we discuss at this point, because we want to make sure that it doesn't influence the meanings that we gain from the data that we collect. On the other hand, as I said, the reality is you will read some studies that use qualitative methods that do have a theoretical basis, and the purpose might actually be to see if that theory is a good fit to understand a particular phenomenon. And in fact, I've been involved in at least 2 manuscripts that we submitted for that were manuscripts reporting qualitative studies that we submitted to journals where we did not have a theoretical framework, because we noted this because there was either one that didn't fit, or because classical qualitative research doesn't have a theoretical basis. And we were required or expected by reviewers to add one. And we were kind of frustrated by that and a little discouraged. And that's why I have the sad face. But in reality, we did find frameworks that fit and put them in our revisions because the reviewers or the editors were looking for them. In your introduction, you define key concepts just like you do in quantitative research, and then you have your significance. This is the order that we do things in at my school. I just put them in these order. Your order might be different. You might have some other topics in an introduction, but these are the basic ones. Reflexivity is done throughout qualitative research from beginning to end, but this is just, I'm bringing it up here because it's a good point to do it. Basically, it means that you examine, you, the researcher, or your team, examine your own judgments, your practices, your belief systems, your experience. I didn't put that in, but your experience with the phenomenon of interest, as well as with qualitative research. So you are looking to look for any beliefs that you have that might affect the research. And there's a whole school of thought with qualitative methods that you try to keep yourself separate and focus on the meanings that you hear, or the essences, or the information that you glean from your participants. There are others that say you never can totally separate yourself. So, but still you should have this awareness, you should reflect. And it is deeper than reflection. It's questioning your own assumptions, not just recognizing your own assumptions, your own biases, your own beliefs, but being prepared to question them, because maybe what you hear from your participants will be different. Bracketing is the term that you will see that is used, especially in phenomenology, to do this process. So an example might be keeping a journal throughout the study, debriefing with someone else, talking with someone about your feelings, your experiences. There's different ways to do it. But the bottom line is reflexivity is an important part of qualitative inquiry throughout the whole process. So I'm going to stop here before we go on to literature review and see if there's any questions. Any questions at this point?
I'm not seeing any questions, but if anyone has a question, please either you raise your hand or you put it on the chat.
Yeah, and I am looking at the chat. I am willing to share a copy of the presentation. I will remove all the pictures and everything because that makes it such a large amount of data. But I am willing to share, the basic content.
Sorry, can I make a comment?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. My question is, when I'm doing a research, and I came across a theory, but I don't know where exactly the theory should be featured. So that's why I say, let me find out from you. Thank you so much.
Okay. It depends, and I will get to these other questions as well that I see in the chat. In terms of theory, and this is, you're talking about using theory in general, in either quantitative or qualitative?
Yes, qualitative, in qualitative research.
In qualitative. Well, in traditional or classical qualitative, you wouldn't have a theory because presumably there isn't a theory to explain the phenomenon that you're interested in. And plus, that there would be the concern that a theory could influence your assumptions and give you biases in terms of, as you begin to collect your data, that you might have assumptions from the theory that would then impact your analysis of your data. So that is the argument, so to speak, for not having a theory. Now, you will see studies that use a theory or a model with qualitative methods. And that could be, like I said, because they actually are doing that on purpose, and they're using it to see if it's a fit, to see if their data, their results line up with the theory. It could be like a very early way to test a theory, so to speak, because there's maybe no instrument to measure. Or, like I said, it could be just that the reviewers, in our case, the reviewers for our manuscripts asked for theories. So we had to find something, which we did. But it's not deductive reasoning. In other words, the theories that we provided helped us understand the phenomenon, but we didn't test the actual concepts of the theory. And then the last thing is that, like I said, you could have what you call theoretical underpinnings. That means that, again, your methods aren't tied directly to the theory, but that the theory helps you understand the phenomenon. So, yeah, the theory, it's a little messy on the role theory can play in qualitative research. I tried to not start with one, but like I said, in 2 of our manuscripts, we had to add one in the revision process, which felt very weird. Okay, in terms of reflexivity, I'll speak a little bit more about that in a moment. Standard sample size, I'll get to that in a little bit. And methods, yes, I'm getting to that. Yes, I'm getting to all that in shortly in methodology. In terms of the reflexivity, backwards here. Basically, it is a type of reflection. It's thinking about your own experiences with this phenomenon, your judgments, your practices, your belief systems, and bringing them to your consciousness, and maybe even, and being aware, maybe even along the way, to question your own beliefs and assumptions based on what you learned from your participants. So, and bracketing is simply, not simply, but it's a way of writing out these ideas or preconceptions. And the overall aim is to try and prevent your belief systems and your assumptions from influencing your results of your study, so that you stay focused on what your participants or your data is telling you, and try not to influence it with your own ideas. So that's reflexivity or bracketing. Okay, so going on to literature review. In traditional qualitative inquiry, for the same reasons that I spoke about in regard to a theoretical framework or a model, the literature review is limited at the beginning of the study. Again, because all this information that you read related to your phenomenon, your concepts of interest, could influence potentially your interpretation of your results. So typically, as in traditional qualitative inquiry, you would only do enough to give background, to write your background for the study, to support the need for the study, because you have to convince others you should do the study, whether it's getting permission to collect your data somewhere, or getting funding, or if you're a learner, getting your committee to approve it, your advisor, your supervisor. And sometimes this may be, in my studies I've done, this is where we write some bracketing. I write my experience with qualitative research, my experience with this phenomenon, putting it down in writing. However, that said, oftentimes, especially for learners, your supervisor may require you to write an exhaustive integrated literature review pre-study. And if you do, and it's very common, then the reflexivity becomes, again, very important to be at this point. How am I going to try and keep all this information that I'm learning separate from what I hear from my data, whether it's participants or written data, books or whatever I use, to make sure that I focus on letting the results emerge from my data and not be influenced at that point by what I already know. And sometimes this might include a section on the type of qualitative inquiry, like if you're using phenomenology or grounded theory, especially if you're a student, you might write a section here to show that you understand, what that is about. So moving on to methods then, and talking about how we go about qualitative inquiry. Let me check. I think there's one question here. Okay. And we'll be stopping for questions in along the way here. Okay, so you've decided to use qualitative methods, qualitative inquiry. The next step, when you get to the design part of your methodology, and again, I'm just doing this in the order that we typically do it, just to organize the presentation. Obviously, anytime you write a research proposal, it's an iterative process. You go back and forth. You might have to revise. You decide, oh, I'm going to use phenomenology. Well, I got to go back and revise my research questions a little bit to fit with that. So we recognize that. But for this presentation, I have to go in a linear process. So next, we're going to look at design then. So then you need to think about, am I going to use a particular type of qualitative inquiry? And I'm going to get to that in a moment, the different types. It totally depends on your purpose and question. So again, a research proposal, the introduction part, which is typically chapter 1 if you're a student, and then literature review, chapter 2, and methodology, chapter 3, has to build a line of reasoning. Everything has to flow logically. So if you get to this part of and you get to design and you say, I'm going to use grounded theory, or I'm going to use this approach I'm going to use qualitative inquiry, and I'm going to use this type, then right away, I would look back to your purpose and your questions and see if they fit with qualitative inquiry or they fit with that type. So that's building your line of reasoning. And so at this point, then you would state and provide your rationale for why you're using qualitative inquiry. If you haven't already, sometimes people have done it in the introduction, but at some point you have to say, I'm going to use qualitative inquiry. This is why. And then if you're using a specific type of qualitative inquiry, you would say that here and explain that. The types of qualitative inquiry that I'm about to get to are like a subset of how you view science, how you view reality, how you actually analyze the data that you collect can be influenced by the type of qualitative you use, but there are actually specific methods of analysis, and I'll be getting to those. So there are a number of types of qualitative inquiry. And one of the things if you're doing a qualitative study or if you're reading one, if you're doing one, is to think about, do I want to use one of these specific types? Whereas if you're reading a qualitative study, then do they say whether they use one of these types? Because if they do, then they have to follow whatever approach they said that they were going to follow. The traditional ones, and I will go over them in the next slide a little bit, are phenomenology, grounded theory, Historical is what it says. I'm not really going to go into that in this presentation anymore, except to say it's basically reading records, written materials to understand a phenomenon. Ethnography is used by anthropologists to understand a culture or a society, what they believe, how they live, what they eat. It all depends on their purpose. Narrative is like a storytelling, and then case study is what it says, analysis of a case situation. These are the general ones that are traditionally viewed as common types of qualitative inquiry. My experience is primarily with grounded theory, but also I've had students do phenomenology. Then there are some types, a couple of types that I put in the category of looking at this with a qualitative lens. In essence, in participatory or social action research, which is community-based, or critical social theory, which right away you see it's a theory, it's not a type of research. These are philosophies. These are ways of looking at, thinking about research, but oftentimes they align with qualitative methods, but they don't have to. You can use, you do participatory action research or social action research where you use quantitative methods. With critical social theory, if you're looking at power relationships, oppression, marginalized populations, colonialism, most often the methods are qualitative. Maybe phenomenology, what is it like to live in a marginalized population, but it can be qualitative or quantitative, I suppose, as well, if there's an instrument. So I call this a qualitative lens. But you can see that the philosophies here, if you believe in the importance of involving a community, the people of a community in your research process, then that really kind of reflects the idea of multiple truths because you're open to their perspectives. Same with critical social theory. So, but the ones on the left are the traditional ones. And this slide just basically goes over, it's a lot of data. I'm not going to read it word for word, but it basically gives for each of these key types what the purpose is, the types of data collection, how it's analyzed, how it's written up, and then the philosophical or epistemological foundations. And these are the ones that in that oval, that purple oval that had positivism on the left, these are the ones that were all over towards the right, where these fit into ways of gaining meaning or understanding phenomena when you have this type of philosophy of science or and reality. So the two that I have the experience with, and I'm going to give some examples in just a moment, but for example, phenomenological is about understanding people's experience. That's why you will often see the word lived experience. What is it like to live with X situation? What is it like to live with postpartum depression, etc.? And so it's typically done with interviews, maybe done with a type of survey if there's one available. And people are describing their experiences and what it meant to them, not just I did this and I this and this, but what it felt like. And there are different types of phenomenological research. So there are subtypes And the important thing is, if you say you're doing any of these, is to find some guidelines in the literature or in textbooks or online, and then follow them. Qualitative research is not catch as catch can, do whatever you feel like. It is systematic, it is methodical. And so you have to state, what method your approach you're using and cite it in your proposal, in your manuscripts, in your reports. You cite the type of approach you used, if you used one, and certainly the type of approach to the analysis of the data that you use. Grounded theory is just what it says. It comes out of sociology. It was developed by Glaser and Strauss. And last I read, Glaser is still alive, and there is a website, a grounded theory website that he has. And the purpose of grounded theory is to examine a social situation and come up with a theory about it, a beginning substantive theory. And so that is the outcome of grounded theory research. So you talk to a whole lot of people, you observe, and then you put together, after you analyze your data, you come up with a theory or a model. So, and you notice here, there are some places where they say you might use a questionnaire, you might use a survey. I would argue that if you say you're using one of these types of qualitative inquiry, that you would be doing interviews, observation, you would not be doing a survey. But this particular source did note that. Then there's mixed methods, where you have a program of research, or maybe you're part of a team, or you're a scientist who is doing a lifelong study of a particular phenomenon. For example, our dean at my School of Nursing, her whole program of research for many, many years, 20, 25 years, has been on grandmothers raising grandchildren and the impact on the children, the impact on the grandparents, all different dimensions of that phenomenon. And so because she has done many studies over the years, and her students have done studies and all on this topic, then many times you will see they've used mixed methods. So they might do qualitative to start off with, to understand the phenomenon, to do instrument development, to do theory development, then use quantitative methods to get lots of data from lots of participants, because qualitative tends to be smaller numbers of participants. And then they might take specific findings and do focus groups or interviews to understand more deeply particular findings from their studies. So many times you will see research teams where there are people who can specialize in different types. Like you might have your team member who specializes in qualitative, your specialist in quantitative, your statistician, etc. But then also you can have within an individual study, you might have a survey, a quantitative survey, but then a few open-ended questions can be very informative. And I encourage my students who are doing quantitative studies to add a few open-ended questions. And I'll be showing you some examples of a study that I've done where that, or a team that I was on where we did that. Mixed methods can be very useful for triangulation of your data. So you might have that in the study that we're going to look at in November to critique, they used both individual interviews with people, and then they did focus groups to triangulate. Or I've read another study where they did quantitative surveys with a large number of nurses. And then to get another perspective, there were only 4 people who had an entirely different role in the situation. And so then they did interviews with those individuals, or a focus group, I can't remember, and then compared to see what did in this case, it was about continuing education. So they talked with nurses about their continuing education and the barriers and the facilitators, et cetera. And then they talked with some educators in hospitals who were in charge of education and got their perspective. So, and then they, compared and contrast them. So that, that helps triangulation. Limitations in mixed methods, it can be costly. It takes expertise in quantitative and qualitative. Now you're dealing with numerical data and also textual data. So how do you work with that? So there are some limitations to mixed methods. In many studies, and I can't overemphasize this, you will not see a formal type of qualitative research used. I believe it adds strength to a study to use, to use one of these types because it adds strength, it adds structure, it shows you're being methodical, and it shows because each of these, well, at least grounded theory, phenomenological, and ethnographic have some philosophical or theoretical basis to them. So then you should feel that you fit with that. But the fact is that you will see many studies that use qualitative methods, but do not have one of these formal types. And then their approach to analysis becomes particularly important, because if you use grounded theory or if you use phenomenological, you will find in the literature approaches to analysis, structures and steps. And but if you don't use a formal type, then it's very important to cite the type of analysis, the approach to analysis of your data that you use. And we'll look at different ones. Okay, so we're going to take a break for 5 minutes. And it's been an hour already, or a little over that. And feel free to put questions in the chat. And then I'm going to be moving on to some examples of different types of qualitative inquiry, and then also then further on to the methodology.
Hello, thank you. I think Dr. Lindell is waiting for questions or responses, reactions.
We're taking a break for 5 minutes, but if anybody has a question, they're welcome to ask it. I will have my mic on, and also they can put it in the chat too.
Yeah, there's one question in the chat.
I'm answering the one about ethics. Yes, I'm answering it now, but basically human rights protection is always important in all research, of course, but there are special aspects for qualitative, and I will mention them along the way. That's a very good question.
Okay, Dr. Lindell, I think somewhere somebody asked about the size of the sample in qualitative research?
Yes, I'm going to get to that.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, in methodology, very shortly after the break.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to start back again. There are a few questions in the chat that I will, some of them I've answered directly. Some I will be covering on later on in methods in the next few minutes. There was one about hypotheses. I am sorry to say I can't help that because number one, in qualitative research, we don't have hypotheses. We don't set out to prove something one way or the other. We are asking questions. We're kind of wondering and then plus I have not personally done research using even quantitative using hypotheses because actually my background, my doctoral degree is the Doctor of Nursing Practice. I don't have a PhD, I have a DNP, and DNP is focused on leadership in practice and improving practice. So actually we work primarily with surveys, with quality improvement, with program evaluation, things like that. So I'm apologize, but I can't help with the question about hypotheses. I can say I did have a student who graduated with her Doctor of Nursing Practice degree in May, who did a quasi-experimental two-group randomized study of a strategy to improve critical thinking in students or clinical judgment specifically. And she actually, very interestingly, everyone improved, all the students improved, but the ones in the control group improved more. So there you go. She's trying to sort that out. She submitted a manuscript. So she didn't have hypotheses per se, she had questions, but underneath she was expecting that the students that got the intervention, which was a specifically directed post-conference after their clinical day, after they were in the hospital all day, they sit down and have a post-conference. And in the experimental group, the intervention group, they got a specific intervention that she taught the faculty on how to lead this. Each student took a turn presenting a patient, and then the faculty used open-ended questions to help them explore their thinking about this patient and this situation. And like I said, everyone improved, but the ones in the control group improved more. So there you go. It happens. Okay, and then ethics I'm going to be talking about, that is important. Let me see. Coding, I will show an example. Minimizing bias. We all have biases. We all have biases. We all have assumptions. That's part of life. That's part of living. That's part of our experience and being alive. All we can do is try to be aware of them, which is, of course, that's metacognition, thinking about our thinking. And I've thought about that myself. The reason I'm particularly aware of it is because metacognition is also a part of effective critical thinking, is the ability to reflect on your thinking and look at your biases and look at your assumptions and try and make sure they're not influencing your care of the patient. So yes, that's you can't make them go away. You will always have biases and assumptions and your experiences, but it's trying to become consciously aware of them. Okay, so this is a study one of my students did about 10 years ago. Typically, as I said, if you were to read about the Doctor of Nursing Practice degree, you would find that, as I said, basically the type of projects that our students do, and they all do have to do one at the doctoral level, is something where they try to improve healthcare or nursing practice or health outcomes. But my school, my own school, which was the very first school to have the practice doctorate, starting all the way back in 1978, we are a very, very research-focused institution. And for many years, our students in our Doctor of Nursing Practice program, including myself, have done research studies. So this was one about 10 years ago, Qualitative Research. This student was interested in, she worked in the emergency room. She was a nurse practitioner in a large urban emergency room. And they got a lot of homeless youth, or what they call transitional youth, who had been in foster care when they were younger, and then they were, quote, emancipated at the age of 18, and now were trying to live on their own. And many were homeless or living in transitional situations. So little was known about the hardships of being uninsured. Many had no health insurance, no coverage. And so she experienced this in the emergency room when they would come in for help, because they clearly had not been getting any routine health care. They didn't have insurance, etc. So her purpose, this study explored the lived experience, note the words there, of transitional uninsured former foster youth. So these were 19 years old, 20, 21, in that transitional phase, hopefully transitional. So lived experience is typically linked with phenomenology. So it says and there are two types of phenomenology, two broad types I'm not going into here, descriptive and interpretive. Pretty much, the words pretty much indicate what you do depending on that approach. Descriptive, you basically describe. Interpretive, you try to make sense of it and interpret it. So anyway, she used descriptive, provided thick, rich descriptions of their experience. She used Husserl's philosophical ideas, etc. I'm not going to read through all this, but you can see here she explains the approach to qualitative inquiry that she used, looking at their subjective experience. And her analysis, she derived from the steps. She used the procedure. Again, it's not loosey-goosey. It's not whatever you feel like. You have to have a set of methods. She used Kolasi, which is a very common one. Here is a phenomenological study done in the Middle East, I believe. I honestly can't remember what country right now. And it's on post-traumatic growth in patients with breast cancer. And basically what it was, that some women who have breast cancer grow from it. They go through a, obviously traumatic time, but then some of them experience growth as an outcome. So they were interested, Iran, there we go. A study about how women with breast cancer perceived post-traumatic growth, and then they wanted to understand this phenomenon, this concept, post-traumatic growth. So they were looking at its dimensions, and they used interpretive phenomenological analysis. So here they used the interpretive approach because they were interested in more than just the experiences the women had. They wanted to look at factors and dimensions. Notice when I said this title, I said post-traumatic growth in patients with breast cancer. I'm a big fan of not labeling people. Although interestingly, there are some people that don't mind labels when you ask them their permission, but in general, I feel it's better to write, in this case, patients with breast cancer. So that's an example of an interpretive phenomenology study. This one is a dissertation I came across online called Being There, a Grounded Theory Study of Student Perceptions of Instructor Presence in Online Classes. So this was a grounded theory study, and you can see in the purpose I highlighted, in order to generate a substantive theory. So that sets you up for using the grounded theory approach to qualitative inquiry. And these were students, online students at a community college, which is like a technical, two-year technical school in the US. And they were doing online, and they were interested in understanding their perceptions of the instructor to help eventually find ways to help instructors improve their teaching. And they used, remember I said it was invented or developed by Glaser and Strauss. Glaser and Strauss split off. That's a whole story with a lot of drama, but they split, and Strauss developed his own approaches. So they used Strauss's approach to identify emerging categories. Emergence is a big word in grounded theory, and then to generate a theory. Excuse me. And this is an example of a mixed method study that I did with two other nurse educators. We did a national study of nurse educator certification. We were all involved in the National League for Nursing, which is one of our two nursing education organizations. The NLN developed back in 2005 a certification for nurse educators that we all were involved in the development of it and had served on the committees and the commission that was overseeing it, the certification. And so we did a study of nurse educators' views of this nurse educator certification. And so this was a mixed method study. It was a quantitative survey plus 9 open-ended questions. And we published 2 articles from it, and they're in the references at the end. One reporting the quantitative part and one reporting the qualitative. So this is the qualitative part from those 9 open-ended questions. And so we had, it was an internet-based study or survey. We received 694 surveys back, huge amount of data from 48 out of 50 states in the US. We took all nurse administrators and nurse educators, so you didn't have to have the certification. We were interested in the views of people who were certified and people who weren't certified. And our study was informed. Remember I said theoretical underpinnings. We had the underpinnings of this model of credentialing research. It's called the expanded conceptual model for credentialing research, which ours was research on a credential. And we used an inductive content analysis approach. So we did not base our analysis from this model. And so this is an example of a mixed method study. And I will tell you that organizing the number of responses to 9 open-ended questions from 694 surveys was a huge challenge. Just organizing that data into Excel, how we were going to code it. Fortunately, the questions were written in a way that they were short answers. They weren't like, what was it like to study for the exam? No, they were very like 1 or 2 sentence answers, but still we had to organize all that data, hundreds and hundreds of responses. Okay. I think given the time that we're in, I'm going to skip this pulse check, but I would encourage each of you to think about what is the area of research that you are doing? What is your phenomenon? What concepts do you study? And if you're not incorporating qualitative inquiry, how might you do that? Could you do a full study? Could you add some open-ended questions to a quantitative survey? If you're adding 1 or 2 questions, we don't usually call that mixed methods, but some people do. And what might be then your purpose statement? How might you have to revise it, or what question would you have to add to your research questions to reflect a qualitative study, or even a couple of open-ended questions? So we're not going to do a breakout, but I would encourage you to think about that. And maybe if you have some ideas, we can talk about them if I have time at the end today, or if we at the next session. I'm going to take a look at the comments in the chat a moment. Okay. All right. So now delving into the methodology, because we now have determined if we're going to have a type of our qualitative research or if we're not going to have one. So anytime you're writing a research proposal, as you get to the point of really getting down to the nitty-gritty, and I always tell my students that Chapter 1, the introduction, is abstract. It is theoretical. We're not talking about methods there, except maybe, and we're not talking about operationalizing, except if you are using a theoretical framework in a quantitative study, you might say which concepts you're going to measure and how. But that can be in this part too. The lit review is very theoretical, very abstract. Now we're getting, as you know, to the nitty-gritty, down to the details. How exactly am I going to do this study? So now we have to circle back and for my students, I actually have them put the purpose and the questions in each chapter as they write it, so that it forces them to reflect on that. Then we take it out before they do their proposal defense. But everything's got to flow from one step to the next. So when we're thinking about the setting for the study, the population, who may have had the experiences I want to understand? And not just that people, but is there anything I can read? Is there anything I can observe? But basically, it's often interviews. So which individuals, where can I find these people? And that's going to affect my recruitment, right? And my settings, and where I'm going to try and get permission to do my study. Because, for example, we found in our study of the nurse educator certification, we got a list from a national organization of all these schools of nursing, and we wrote to the deans, and we got institutional review board approval, which I'll get to, from one of the universities that the three of us are associated with. And then we wrote to all these deans of all these schools and program directors and asked them to forward our survey to their faculty. And we actually had a few schools write back and say that we had to go through their institutional review boards as well. So, and with our critical thinking study, we wound up we had 8 sites that we recruited faculty from, and we had an IRB approval at every site. So I was the site coordinator for my university. So it affects where I'm going to recruit, where I might have to get institutional review board approval. But the first thing is, where can I find? So my student that did the study of the former foster youth, there was a nonprofit NGO a small organization in her city. She lived in a large city that focused on this population, these young people, helping them connect up with services, helping them go to school, etc., find housing, food. And so she recruited there. In fact, the man that ran it, who was a social worker, was on her research committee. So how are you going to find these individuals? I had a student who did a study. She had been in the military. She was a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner. She worked for our Veterans Administration in one of their big hospitals in our area. And she was doing a qualitative study of women who had been sexually assaulted in the military. So now they were out of the military. She was not doing it with people who were still in the military, but she had encountered many in her practice at the veterans, and it was obviously extremely traumatic, and it affected them for many, many years, forever. So she wanted to interview them and talk with them. And she had a very difficult time finding these individuals. She knew they were out there, but she had she advertised in newspapers. She had signs and bulletin boards in different areas. And she only wound up with, I think, about 6. It was very difficult. So how can you find these individuals? And then you have to get permission from them, from these sites, just like you would for any research, get their permission to do your study at their site. And you want to get different perspectives, as I mentioned, like with that study of the continuing education or continuing professional development. They got data from nurses, and then they got data from the educators that worked in the hospitals. So how can I get different perspectives of this? And that will be influenced by how much time you have, how much, you might have to do one group of perspectives for one study and then report that, write it up, analyze it, and then maybe get different perspectives in another study. You have to consider cultural factors, such as language, such as different practices, as you think about this. Sampling in qualitative research is not random. It is purposeful. You go out, you figure out who you want to talk with, and then you go out and look for those individuals who have had that experience. There is no power analysis involved. Institutional review boards, at least ours, will ask you how many people you're going to expect to have in your study, how many men, how many women, and it's in a form, an electronic form that you must fill out. You have no choice, there's no text box before you can move on to the next part of your application. So in that case, we look at the literature maybe on if other studies, some qualitative studies have been done maybe in this area, and you try and come, or you maybe, I would assume you've already contacted your sites where you're going to try and recruit. So you should have a general idea of if you have to give a number of about how many. But basically, we'll get to this when we are looking at analysis. You keep collecting data, hopefully, until you have theoretical saturation, till you're not learning anything new, because you are analyzing as you go along. So, and that's very clearly described in that sample article that I gave that we'll look at next week. So, what is practical for you? Convenience sampling, where you find a place and recruit there. Snowball. I had another student who was a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner who owned a practice in a rural area of Oregon, way out west, northwest US. She could not ethically recruit at her business, at her site. She couldn't recruit the patients at her site. So she arranged with a colleague to go to their site many miles away and recruit there. So, and snowball recruiting is where you ask people who have had the experience to recommend other people and maybe tell them about it, tell them about the study or that. That's snowball recruitment. Okay, let me see if there's any questions. Try and conclude 10 minutes before. Okay. All right, collecting data. There's all kinds of sources of data. This is ethnographic in an actual, setting, cultural setting. Interviews, this is in a dialysis setting. Focus groups. Pamphlets. I did a study where I picked up pamphlets at the sites. Internet, books. This is a library, reading. There's many different ways to collect data. Again, what sources do I need to understand the situation? Photo voice is a newer one using photography. And this is a study from South Africa, but actually there was one done in my area, very similar. People with diabetes were given cameras and then were asked to take photographs to reflect the challenges of managing their diabetes. Like some showed the price of food and how they couldn't afford these foods or different, So, but this one was actually done in South Africa. And so I won't read through all this, but they used actually a deductive thematic approach. They did deductive, and the people took photographs. And if you look at the article, they have photographs.
Sorry. Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry. I'll ask one question.
Yes. Yes, go ahead. Okay, maybe put it in the chat. Human rights protection, you always have to get whatever approvals for qualitative research that you would have to have. In Kenya, I had to have the Ministry of Health and Sanitation. I had to have the college. I had to have NACOSTI at the Kenya level, and then my own university institutional review board. Again, I mentioned already, how will you deal with if there are questions about the size and makeup of your sample? In your consent and recruitment, be very clear the nature of the study, explain what you're going to ask of the participants and how long. With our one of critical thinking, we were talking with senior physicians, very senior physicians, and so we kept it to 30 minutes. We promised them no more than 30 minutes. Are you doing focus groups? Are you doing individual interviews? You need to tell people what you're asking. How are you going to record them? Are you going to use video? Are you going to use audio? How much time? Are you going to get back to them and ask them to review your results? That's called member check. We'll get to that, but they need to know what you're asking of them, just like in any consent. How are you going to promote confidentiality? Very important. For example, in a focus group, typically people have the opportunity to make up a name and put on a little tent in front of where they're sitting. So if I'm Debbie, I might put Ann to protect my confidentiality. In all your transcripts and all your materials, you always make sure you've removed all information that could identify people, where it was done, how, anything that might the discussion trigger emotional distress. For example, with the one of the former foster youth, with the one of the women that had experienced sexual assault in the military. In the consent form, we offer resources for counseling. We tell them we will stop the interview if you get upset, and we will provide counseling resources. So there are some special, we used to actually have to practically teach the IRB about qualitative years ago. Now they're, at least at my university, they're pretty used to it, but still you have to cover all this stuff. This is just a quick little trip to Mexico. This is in 2000, we did some focus groups in a community outside of Mexico City, which is right here. This was a clinic that it was the public health department and the village were these buildings, but this yellow and blue one was owned by the University of Mexico, and it was an outreach clinic for their faculty and students. And here we were. We went to this woman's home, Sylvia. She was a patient of the clinic. She organized focus groups for us to meet with people that worked in the village. We were doing community assessment. We were trying to understand health issues of different populations of people that lived in this village. So these were agricultural workers. So here we actually went on this little canoe, our team, to her house, where we met. And this was one of my students right in the middle. She was a graduate student, but she had experience leading focus groups, and she spoke Spanish, which the rest of us did not. Here was a second focus group in that same community with community leaders. And this says Taxio Tobacco Healthy Community. And then this was a focus group we did with the elders who came to the clinic. The nurses ran like a program for older adults. And these were some individuals who were very, very old, in their 90s. I think some were over 100. So these were focus groups that we did. Let's see, where are we? Okay, I need to I'm going to get up to analysis. Then we will stop at analysis and do analysis the next time. So data collection, what do I want to learn? What stories do I want to hear? So then you develop your interview schedule from that. In phenomenology, or if you're looking at people's experiences, you might start with a very broad question. What has it been like to live with X or to experience X? And then you use prompts to help them, encourage them to go deeper. Then what happened? Or what did that feel like? Or that open-ended questions. In grounded theory and many other qualitative studies nowadays, there's often semi-structured questions, but they are still open-ended, always, because yes, no is like a conversation ender. So we use, tell me about your experience with, or what were the barriers? What were the challenges you encountered? What helped things go better? What recommendations do you have? Those kind of things. And you always start with the most neutral at the beginning. Ethnography often involves interviews, but observation too. The interview schedule is a scaffold. It is not cast in stone. Unlike quantitative, yours can evolve based on your initial analysis. You might ask participants numbers 1, 2, and 3, one set of questions, and 4, 5, and 6, you ask the same questions, but maybe you add on a couple more, so that it doesn't have to be precisely the same. It can evolve some. And it can evolve even during an interview. Focus groups take skill. You need a facilitator and an assistant, usually a flip chart to record points, plus audio or video recording. And then also with all interviews, you're going to want to record them somehow. And if you're using audio, we always said 2 recorders in case one doesn't work. And now I have because of COVID, she did her whole focus groups. She planned in person. She did them on Zoom. She was interviewing. She works in a clinic. There's a group of clinics in New York City for individuals who identify as LGBTQ+. And she was doing focus groups with those individuals to learn how they could improve their care at this facility. And she planned them in person, but wound up doing them by Zoom. I can't share any more about that because she has a manuscript in review. When to stop collecting data, this idea of theoretical saturation. Am I learning anything new? If I'm not, maybe I've reached saturation, but then I want to ask, are there other perspectives I want to get if I have time? Or maybe I have no more people that have had that experience. In my study as a student, that I did as a student, there were about 12 people that had had the experience I was interested in. So I interviewed as many as possible. That was it. And it looks like I need to stop there. And let me see. Yes, focus group consent, very important, that how you are going to protect confidentiality and that they have to protect each other's. Yes, what happens here stays here. Yes, very important. Thank you for that comment. So I am going to stop here. The next thing that I had was an activity, which we're not going to have time for. And because I only have 1 hour in November, I'm not going to be able to do it. But if you, it's a song by Coldplay, if you're familiar with that group from the UK, very, very famous group of a band, is to take their song, Viva La Vida, and I have some information about it. You can actually read on Wikipedia. This is the cover album. You can watch it on YouTube. And then I will put in the chat a little form that you can use to look for patterns in the data it has the, I will put it in the chat. The form has the lyrics for the song. And oh, I'm not sure I can add it to the chat. I believe, Ephraim, you have it to put in the chat? The
No.
form? Yes, do you have the form to put in the chat? I can't do it.
Please put it in the chat. There's one more question here about how long does one?
How long do you keep the data? You keep the data, and that's another thing you have to tell the IRB. We generally say 3 years or dissemination, when we've completed dissemination and analysis. And in qualitative, like in our critical thinking study, we published 2 manuscripts from it, and we wrote a third that we never could get accepted. And because I think we were just stretching our analysis maybe a little bit too much. But in any event, we kept having to go back to our data to analyze for these new research questions that we were pulling out of it. So we kept that data for about 5 years, I think. But then when you're done with it, or whatever time limit you've given the IRB, then you do destroy the data.
Yeah, I think I have the forms now. I've sent the forms.
Okay, yes. Yeah, if you want to watch this video, it's their song, playing their song. And then if you can watch it on YouTube, and then you can do your own little analysis. This form has the lyrics on it. And I know we didn't get to coding and all, but you can just play around with it and look for patterns, look for what stands out to you in this song. And I will send Ephraim the slides without all the photos and everything, just the content, because otherwise it will not be manageable to send through email. These are just some other meanings to the same. Frida Kahlo is a famous Mexican artist, and she had painting called Viva la Vida, same as the song from Coldplay, totally different meaning. And this is a cover on a puzzle I found called Viva la Vida. This is Frida Kahlo. There's some of her watermelons. And so another meaning attached to this in Spanish, what means live the life, Viva la Vida. And we'll do this next time. We have to end.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Lindell. Maybe before I really conclude, I would like to remind those that are at the meeting that our next monthly meeting is on the 4th of October. And you know that we are going to have both presenters, Dr. Lindell, who is here today, and Dr. Mary Barker, who is the two of them will be sharing on us on qualitative and quantitative researches. So let's attend in our big numbers. I'm sure we all benefited from this presentation, and we've learned a lot of new things from this presentation. And then please note that in November, there will be no monthly meeting, but the researchers and the supervisors will have to communicate and share their concept notes. Even those that have not shared anything, you are welcome anytime to send your concept notes and choose your supervisors, or the supervisors again are also encouraged to go through the website that is indicated in the communication, check for the topics that are there, check if you can work with another researcher also. Thank you very much for everybody. But I just want to say thank you very much, Dr. Lindell, and I'm very, very, impressed about your presentation, and we hope to continue to network and collaborate and expand the horizon of research globally. As a nurse myself, and I'm very proud of seeing you in this level and being such an expert in research. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to everybody who is here. Let's come together. Let's share ideas on research. There's a lot to research on. There's a lot that we can work on together as teams, as consortiums, and so on and so on. And we can take research to the next level and improve quite a number of things in our universe. Thank you, Ephraim Senkire, for being here. I know I had to stand in for him because he was committed somewhere, although he's attending the meeting. Thank you so much. Goodbye to everybody. See you on the 4th of October. Please invite the next person, and please invite students to come through to this meeting so that they can learn a lot in the process. Thank you. Bye.
We meet in October. Yeah.
Yes, on the 4th of October.
Yes.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye. And next time I will go over data management and analysis, and then we'll talk about the sample article.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Great comments in the chat. Very good. Very helpful. Thank you.